How y'all doing? How y'all doing? How y'all doing? I need you to like.
Dream.
I need you to like
One
this video and I
civilization
need you to
conceived the
subscribe.
impossible and
I
built
need
the
us to have a
unimaginable.
discussion.
The
Let's have a
Egyptians
discussion to
worked on a
understand
much
that in
grander
today's,
scale
what we're
than
dealing with is
anyone
not white
did for
supremacy.
millennia.
We're dealing with white
Enriched by their
insecurity.
conquests and empowered by their gods,
People cannot believe they are superior to another group of people when you've been doing archaeological digs in Africa for hundreds of years, and as far back as you can look, you see the advancements that blacks have made to society.
The ultimate monument to what?
Now, Europeans try hard to separate blacks from Egypt. They try to make it like Egypt is not a part of Africa, and they try to separate or differentiate between the lighter or the darker skin complexions and who contributed what to the advancement of Egypt. Always trying to backplay what they see as darker skinned people contributions to Egypt.
I come face to face with the black pharaohs of Africa. While flooding consumes every corner of Egypt, its new capital city, Memphis, stays dry, thanks to the massive 49-foot dam that surrounds it. It is the first dam ever built in recorded history. The driving force behind the dam and the city it protects is Menes. It consisted of two massive stone walls standing 35 feet tall, still 15 feet shorter than Menes Dam. Each wall was 80 feet thick at its base and 40 feet thick at the top. Dirt and loose stones filled in the space between them.
First dam ever built known to man. Look at the technology that our people put into building those pyramids.
Ceramics, it tells us about trade and exchange, and what we know now, that pottery was found in Sudan at 8,000 BCE, and its civilization predated Babylon, Rome, and Greece. So the exchange of ideas went both ways. It wasn't just a receiver of ideas from Egypt.
Which meant the monarchs of Kush were also the pharaohs of Egypt. The kingdom of Kush thrived for over 1,000 years and was the center of trade for iron and gold. The Kushites also mummified their dead and built their own types of pyramids. In fact, the Kushites' capital of Meroe is home to ruins of over 200 pyramids, far more than Egypt.
If anyone ever really studied Egypt, they would understand that the knowledge of Egypt, when they're talking about Sirius B, Cyrus, B, satellite, and all those things, that come from the Twat people, which come from Central Africa, which is mostly noted as Mali. Right? That comes from the Twat people, and they come from Central Africa and inwards. So I wanted you to understand how far back the history goes, and the fact that the archaeologists have proven that the knowledge comes from inward towards Africa, not northern Africa. It came from more of the central parts of Africa.
This period of ancient Sudan's history is linked to that of its neighbor to the north, Egypt. At about the same time in ancient Egypt, that is around 3000 BC, the first dynasties were establishing the rule of the pharaohs. What was the relationship like between these two close kingdoms? It was both hostile and complementary. And over the centuries, the balance of power would shift from one to the other. As Shadia Taha explains, in the writing of history, mostly by Western scholars, the importance of ancient Sudan in this relationship has been rather overlooked.
Both countries influence each other, but the Eurocentric group, they always thought of Kerma as younger than Egypt and always copying Egypt. But they didn't give Kerma the credit it deserves, because Kerma was a very advanced state.
Let's be clear. You don't have a belief in your superiority if you have to hide the advancements of another group of people. You can't say that you believe that you are superior to me if you have to hide my advancements. You have to deny my accomplishments. Right? And this for Black people have to understand, when we're dealing with white supremacy, we're dealing with the fact that our successes make whites feel insecure.
The Buhan fort stretched almost 2 football fields long and utilized technology on a par with the European fortresses of the Middle Ages.
Nothing like the fortress of Buhan had ever been seen throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. One of the reasons why it's so important from an engineering perspective is that it has layers of defense, emplacements for archers, so that you could fire arrows in any number of directions against an invading army. And then even outside of those walls, you had a moat and then a wall beyond the moat, so that any enemy army trying to attack the fortress would have to climb over this wall, enter the moat, be exposed to the archers on the outside walls, and then take 2 successive fortification walls before reaching the very interior of the fortress.
The Buhan fort could house 1,000 troops at a time.
Let's be clear, this is where moats come from. When you talk about Europe, their fortresses, you see the moats. This was built thousands of years before Europe ever had a castle, before Europe had any structures. This is why we have an issue with the hate that we deal with. This is why we have an issue with hate, is because this is done thousands of years before Europe ever had any palaces built. Africa already had moats built. We already had those type of palaces built.
Mali Empire. The Great Mali Empire began in the 1200s by Sundiata Keita, sometimes referred to as Lion King. The Mali Empire was known for being the epicenter of trade, elaborate mosques, Islamic schools, and simply for being a world of luxury and riches. One of the greatest leaders of the empire, Mansa Musa, had so much gold that he passed it out to the poor along his Hajj to Mecca. The Mali Empire was so rich through trade that by the 14th century, it was the source of almost half of the world's gold exports from West Africa. The empire was also home to Sangara Madrasa, one of the greatest centers of learning, and housed the largest library in Africa at the time, with an estimated 700,000 manuscripts.
Another thing you could have an emphasis and notice about Black cultures. Multiple Black cultures put a strong emphasis on education, right? Multiple Black cultures had a wide range of some form of basic public education, basically. We had a way where we promoted education in our cultures and civilizations that we built from Mali, Egypt, various other dynasties, right? Where in Europe, you've never seen an opportunity to educate the masses. And the purpose of me showing you this is for you to understand is that they try to do not deny that Black people built Egypt, but understand we built many dynasties in Africa. So to act as if we're not people who create and build civilizations is someone who's have never read a history book.
Nearly 2,000 years before the Romans built their first mud huts, the pharaohs were harnessing the power of engineering on an unprecedented scale. And for the first time in history, technology was beginning to revolutionize not only the way people lived, but the way they died.
Now, at the time you're talking about the build of the Great Pyramids, right? Which is thousands of years before Rome came into an existence, right? I want to explain and correct one thing. The Great Pyramids were not used as tombs. They did not find anybody was buried there. They was used for other things. Another thing I want to point out is the fact that that is not the first time that Blacks had been building their burial site. Prior to going to Egypt, we had already done the process of embalming, creating burial sites for the dead. And this is necessary for you to have an understanding of where these cultures come from. They come from Central Africa. They're coming from inside Africa, out towards Northern Africa, towards the Nile. That is where these customs are coming from.
We learn something about the inhabitants of Kerma from their death rituals, their customs, and what kind of objects they made and used. The traditional Kerma grave, like this one, is marked by a dome-shaped tumulus of earth, outlined by a ring of black stones sprinkled over with white pebbles. The body was placed on the south side of the burial chamber. There was also pottery in the grave.
Each of the Great Pyramid's 4 sides is almost perfectly symmetrical, rising at a precise angle of 51 degrees. When Khufu built his towering monument, Egypt's old kingdom was at the height of its wealth and power.
During the times of the Roman Empire, another influential empire was thriving in East Africa. The Kingdom of Aksum was a trading giant whose gold and ivory created a vital link between ancient Europe and the Far East. The Kingdom of Aksum also developed its own written script known as Ge'ez, one of the first in Africa, and had its own unique architectural style.
Let's be clear. That was the oldest written language that they have known to man. Rome did not have a written language. Greek did not have a written language. That is the oldest written language that they have. No. So, and understand this, at the same time that Rome was in power, we had other African kingdoms in power that had power.
At Deir el-Bahri, the architect Senenmut succeeded in creating a one-of-a-kind temple for a very unique pharaoh. She commissions a massive mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes, the hometown and power base of the new kingdom pharaohs. It will serve as a shrine to her spirit after death and perpetuate her connection to the gods. Today, the temple is surrounded by barren desert. But in ancient times, landscaped gardens and pools would have made it one of the most lavish monuments in the world. The temple rises in 3 levels of terraces built into the slope of a towering limestone cliff. The terraces are connected to each other by a broad central staircase. The upper levels are supported underneath by long colonnaded porticos. On the walls inside one of them are reliefs depicting Hatshepsut's divine conception. At Deir el-Bahri, the architect Senenmut succeeded in creating a one-of-a-kind temple for a very unique pharaoh. The project took 15 years to complete.
The Songhai Empire. This large West African kingdom was formed in the 15th century and encompassed a dozen of modern-day African nations. The capital of this massive empire was the city of Gao, which was located in modern-day Mali. Its greatest leader was King Mohammed Eskia, also known as Eskia the Great, who expanded the reach of the kingdom and established hundreds of Islamic schools in Timbuktu. He also opened his court to scholars and poets from throughout the Muslim world. He advocated for learning and rewarded professors with large pensions.
Again, notice there's another, notice that's the 3rd African dynasty that I've shown that had a strong emphasis on education. This has never been shown throughout Europe, where there's been an importance on educating the masses, and where there's been quite the opposite. The objective have always been to keep the public ignorant.
First, builders would install a granite base strong enough to bear the weight of the obelisk. Next, they would surround that base with an enclosure wall made of mud brick. That enclosure would then be filled with sand. On 2 sides of the wall, mud brick ramps would be erected. Using ropes and a series of sleds laid underneath the obelisk, it would be pulled up one ramp by laborers descending the other until it rested upright on the sand. The sand would then be dug away gradually as laborers continued to pull the obelisk toward vertical until it landed squarely on its base.
I'll show you the obelisk to show you this. They try to act as we had nothing to add to civilization. How come all throughout Europe you have an obelisk? How come all throughout Europe you have stolen obelisks from Africa? Stolen art all throughout Africa. They want us not to understand the significance in the actions, in the buildings, and the structures that our ancestors erected, built, had significance. They want us to ignore it, but yet in Washington, D.C., they feel important to build one, an obelisk. They feel important to have an obelisk at the Vatican. This is the Catholic Church Center. Why do they have something that symbolizes African spirituality, right, at the Church of the Vatican Center? Don't allow people to devalue your contribution to society, Black people. Understand that they have been duplicating us. Understand they know the value of Black people. They know what we have contributed to the society. They know this. The museums is filled with African art.
The Kingdom of Zimbabwe. Established around 1220, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe expanded artistic and stone masonry tradition to impressive levels. Elaborate stone buildings were built, and trade with Asia and Arabic partners thrived in this kingdom that was greatly influenced by the Kingdom of Mapungubwe in southern Africa. The city of Great Zimbabwe served as the capital of the kingdom. Around 1220, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe expanded artistic and stone masonry tradition to impressive levels. Elaborate stone buildings were built, and trade with Asia and Arabic partners thrived in this kingdom that was greatly influenced by the Kingdom of Mapungubwe in southern Africa. The city of Great Zimbabwe served as the capital of the kingdom. That is where the ruins of the impeccably built buildings are found today.
Finally, by the mid-20th century, the growing weight of evidence could simply not be ignored any longer. Great Zimbabwe, as the site was now known, once home to between 18 and 25,000 people, had in fact been built by Africans. Not only that, but this city was part of a much larger system.
You know, the insanity that white people went to Africa and tried to argue that the structures built in South Africa was not built by Africans. This is how much they feel as if your progress belittles them.
Styles of architecture, suggesting a long-lasting and widespread culture, the descendants of which now live all across southern Africa, having dispersed into many groups.
His impatience challenged his engineers to invent a new way to build faster. They responded with a pioneering breakthrough: small limestone blocks cut into a standard size that could be easily carried and stacked. The blocks, called talatat by archaeologists, were an ancient precursor to today's prefabricated building materials.
Do those look familiar? Understand, it's not white supremacy, it's white insecurity. Whenever they look at something, look up anything and see that you came first, it brings out their insecurity, their fear that they cannot compete in a meritocracy society with Black people.
The design of the city itself was equally groundbreaking. Amarna would cover 24 square miles, running 8 miles along the east side of the Nile and 3 miles inland. Its layout would radiate from the royal tomb like sun rays emanating from a pharaoh's spirit. A wide royal road would run parallel to the river, linking the central city to the palaces and temples of the pharaoh.